All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to today's webinar, Do More with Your Databases, hosted by Techipedia, sponsored by IDERA. We're going to dive right in, folks, to the presentation. So our presenters today are Devin Gallagher, Senior Sales Engineer at IDERA, and yours truly on the right-hand side, Eric Kavanagh. Feel free to send questions anytime, folks, using the Q&A component of your webcast console. Let's kind of talk about where we're going today. So years ago, in 2005, as a matter of fact, yours truly did an interview with Dr. Michael Stonebreaker. At the time of the interview, I didn't really know who he was, which is kind of fun because I found out later that he is arguably the godfather of the modern database. He's the guy who designed Postgres way back, I guess in the 1970s or late 70s or so. And since then, he's done many different things. He's founded many different companies. And at the time, he was promoting Vertica. That's now HP Vertica. You may have heard of it. But he had a whole campaign around the theme, one size does not fit all. And his point was that at that time, 2005, relational databases dominated the marketplace. They were used for basically everything, transactional systems, analytical systems, whatever purpose you needed your database for, the relational database was doing the job for you. Of course, IBM was big in that day, Oracle with their database technologies. They were relational databases as opposed to different kinds of databases. So he was focused on column-oriented databases at the time. And his point was that really relational databases are great for certain things, but they're not great for everything. That hence the one size does not fit all concept. And what he was trying to communicate was there was a real need for different kinds of databases to serve very specific business needs. So columnar databases are very good for analytics for a couple different reasons, one of which is because of compression. So if you think about it, a column-oriented database, the idea is that in the average spreadsheet, the columns are going to have similar data. The rows have all kinds of different data. The rows are the records. So you have first name, last name, company, title, phone, etc. All those details, that's good for transactional systems because you can pull up a whole record and then know someone's name, their phone number, all this relevant information about them to do a transaction. That's great stuff. So relational is good for transactional stuff. Relational is also good for things like what Teradata will do, for example, data warehouses, right? Lots of tables that are connected by primary keys and so forth. It's all about access path and it's all about performance. And Stonebreaker's point was that at the time, there really were not enough choices on the market to solve some of these very pressing business needs. So think about where we were in 2005. Data warehousing was arguably at its peak. We were just starting to knock on the door of big data. We were just starting to knock on the door of these massive data sets that need to be crunched in order to analyze and understand what's going on. So his point was the time had come for a revolution in database design. And wow, was he ever correct? Since that time, there has been an absolute proliferation of database technologies. Well, way back when, it was all about the appliances. Remember Netezza, that company that came out? Of course, Microsoft later, I'm sorry, IBM later bought them for like $1.4 billion or something, which blew my mind. But you had all of these data warehouse appliances coming out. You had Netezza, you had Datalegro, you had Datopia, you had a bunch of different options, Greenplum. Around the same time, I interviewed Luke Lonergan, who was the CTO of Greenplum. Well, of course, that's still around today as well. But Michael Stonebreaker's point was that something had to change. And he gave a very interesting explanation for how we got here. Basically, he said that it was too complicated for the technical people to explain to the sales and marketing people why you needed different database architectures to solve problems. It was just easier to throw one big product at the marketplace. I thought that was rather amusing. It may have been a bit of cynicism on his part, but the point is he was there, so he saw and he knows what went down. Well, since then, there's been an absolute explosion of database types. We're going to talk about that. So this is from RegionTrack. Most of these logos I described from RegionTrack. It's a listing of popular database technologies and database management products. And you can see there's quite a few of them. This is just the top 30 or so of them out there. There are so many options today. Well, why is that? If you look at this screen, you're going to see something kind of pop out at you if you're familiar with the space. CouchDB, Neo4j, MySQL, Redis Labs, MariaDB, all of those are open source databases. Well, what happens when you have a market in which it costs X amount of dollars to buy a product, let's say a database, and let's face it, back in the 90s and early 2000s, companies were paying Oracle and IBM a ton of money. They're paying Teradata a ton of money to use their database technology. Well, all of a sudden, you have all these open source tools that are free. Well, there's a joke you could have free isn't free. Technically, it's yeah, it's free. You can download the code and do something with it if you have really good developers. But one of the old jokes about open source is it's not really free. You still need people who can stitch it all together and know what they're doing. And of course, there's a certain aspect of open source that stuff gets just good enough to get the job done and then doesn't really get much better unless you harden it. And that's, of course, where the whole operating system on top, if you will, or the business operating system, the business management of an open source system, that business model is to harden it and provide services around it. So that's what you see a lot of these companies doing, like Red Hat, for example, or 10gen, or any number of these other companies, including, of course, the Hadoop players of Cloudera, and to not the same business model for Hortonworks. They're much more a service-oriented company. You pay for contracts, and you pay for services, basically. But the point is that you have all these open source options now. Well, that throws everything into a loop somewhat, because now you can do stuff for a lot less expensive, at least for the software. But what does that actually mean? Well, open source is no longer on the fringe. Open source is woven into the fabric of how you design software. And part of that, part of the result from that is now we have all these different options, all these different choices to be made. Well, that's good in a lot of ways, and it's also a little bit bad, because guess what? Everything just got a whole heck of a lot more complex. Now you have all these different databases that you have to learn about, and NoSQL databases, as they're described, which usually means no SQL, but it also means not only SQL. That, of course, is the structured query language, SQL, we're talking about. All those different databases require different means, different skill sets, different packets of knowledge, if you will, to manage. Well, that just got a whole lot more complicated. So, of course, DBAs, database administrators, they're the folks who have to manage these environments. They're the folks who have to keep trains running on time. They have to make sure these databases are performing properly. And once again, remember, it's all about performance. So it's been great. We've had this Cambrian explosion, really, of database types, in large part thanks to folks like Dr. Stonebreaker, in large part also thanks to the open source movement. But then again, it's going to take a lot more time, energy, and knowledge to understand all these systems. And that's what we're really talking about today is how can you help your DBAs, how can, of course, you also help your analysts and business people get what they need? Because remember, the database, it's the foundation of the information economy. Databases underpin just about everything that's going on out there. Even pseudo databases like Hadoop, which is in fact a pseudo database, it's a file system. Older database systems were just file systems, and that's what Hadoop is all about. There's a lot of reverse engineering that went into the Hadoop space to make that stuff work and to make it viable. And by the way, as that was all happening, other big players got into the mix, like Amazon with Redshift, like Amazon with DynamoDB, right? So you have all these major players now stepping into the picture, including, of course, the cloud players. Microsoft is now heavy into the cloud. With Azure, you have new database types like Snowflake, which is designed for the cloud. So what's going on here? We have a whole lot more stuff to learn, to know, to understand. And if you look at what some of the big guys have done, well, there's the old expression, if you can't beat them, join them, right? IBM jumped into the open source movement early and spent $1 billion to harden Linux as an enterprise operating system. And of course, Oracle jumped in and bought Java. Remember all that? They bought those guys. They bought Sun Microsystems. So they own Java, which is the code language for Hadoop. They own MySQL, which was really a competitive move to stave off or to cause some trouble to Microsoft and to kind of grab that whole mid-sized market. So you can just co-opt all this stuff too. So this all got me thinking, was the mainframe the pinnacle of efficiency in computing? And probably that's the case. That's probably true. This is, of course, the Tower of Babel. Well, in today's world of database, we have to be able to speak all these different languages. We need to understand all these different architectures, how all these different tools work. They all have different interfaces. They have different mechanisms of action. They have different ways of doing things. And in the modern world, if you're going to be a DBA, you really have to know all these different systems, and you have to have some tool to be able to understand all that. Now, there's also this concept of a self-healing database. I've been in the business for a long time now. I've been an analyst for about 20 years. taking briefings from the most cutting edge, fascinating organizations. And it's really amazing the stuff that is being built these days. Now, in terms of self-healing, I would just say don't believe everything you hear. Most of that is, in fact, hyperbole. It's hype, as they say. There is some very interesting stuff happening. Machine learning is a very powerful set of technologies that can be used to optimize performance, to identify signatures, if you will, of problems when disks crash, for example, when network activity chokes up. You can identify certain patterns of behavior and then auto-correct certain things. So there is something to be said for the concept of self-healing, but I promise you we're a long, long way from a database that just fixes itself and auto-tunes itself and takes care of everything. That's probably never going to happen. The devil's always going to be deep, deep, deep in the details. So just be wary of that kind of thing. I'm quite sure humans will always be in the mix to some degree or other, but we are certainly moving in a pretty interesting and fascinating direction. So this is one of my favorite industry analysts, Mark Madsen of Third Nature. He works with Teradata these days. He's a real visionary, and he's the one who taught me that any new database, and there are lots of them out there, any new database, it takes about 10 years in production before you find the edge cases that will crash it. That's pretty interesting stuff. He also says from behind the lines, if you will, on the front lines of big businesses everywhere, that those Hadoop clusters crash all the time. They crash all the time. It's not a very stable technology space, even to this day, even after 10 years of trying to perfect that stuff. So just a thing to remember, if you're going to get one of these new databases, a really new database, there's some really cool ones out there. We still have not found the edge cases that will crash those things. So you just have to keep that in mind. And finally, last but not least, complexity is the bane of a DBA's life. It is going to be difficult. The more databases you have to manage, the more complex that scenario becomes. You really have to find a way to simplify these things. And let's face it, having a tool to address all that stuff is really one of the best ways that you can possibly do that. And with that, I'm going to try to change the presenter here. In fact, let's see. Yeah, let me give the presentation over to Devin Gallagher from IDERA, who's going to take us through what's going on. Yes. So Devin, take it away.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Eric. All right. Let me share my screen. Okay, thank you, Eric, and would like to thank Techpedia for allowing us to show Aqua Data Studio. So we have a few follow-up slides here, maybe setting the framework for DBAs, but the product that we're showing is Aqua Data Studio, and so everything I show you here, you'll be able to download and install and dive right into DBA features. So that's the positioning of this product. It's a productivity software for anyone that needs to work with databases. And so obviously DBAs really benefit from the administration features inside of Aqua Data Studio. Okay, so a couple of other slides to follow up on Eric's. Obviously DBAs and database administrators are responsible for managing and administering databases. Here's a list of areas that, if you're new to administering databases, would be areas for you to be familiar with. For the rest of us, I think these are very familiar, right? The benefit of a cross-platform solution is being able to accomplish these tasks from a single tool, right? Connect to multiple databases, look at system performance on multiple platforms, like Eric was just explaining the different range of databases that we're all responsible for. So these are areas that Aqua Data Studio can help, right? Connect, look at performance, create and manage users, look at security, backup, import, export data, even alerting and perhaps graphical notifications when certain thresholds are crossed. So these are areas that we can look at inside of Aqua Data Studio. There's some terminology, knowledge transfer that might be familiar to you from other tools in this space, or specific to different vendor platforms. but we can talk a little bit more about those, right? From instances to schemas, managing users and permissions, or security and logins, right? Storage might have some different terminology in different platforms, and of course, active transactions or sessions. So these are all core areas that a DBA tool would or should provide. And then it's nice to have all the other bells and whistles that you'd expect in a SQL IDE, right? That we've all been familiar with, from being able to execute our own scripts to comparing and syncing data, having a repository to go back to those, right? So these are features in a DBA tool that save us time, make us more productive, reduce errors, improve accuracy, and those are all provided in a tool like Aqua Data Studio. So let's dive right in. These slides will be available or provided for you. And then in terms of some terminology to introduce, some of these might be familiar to you, but we'll introduce these and perhaps tie these to some of the main menus. But here you can see some starting points for using Aqua Data Studio in terms like registering a database, the query analyzer for executing SQL, and then the import, export, database administration features really found throughout the product, whether you're comfortable in a right-click type menu, right, or driving from main menus. There's a range of features within Aqua Data Studio that we'll introduce to you here today. Okay, so once again, the tool started in terms of development and administration. A lot of analyst features with some of the visual analytics and drag and drop type functionality. So DBAs like to give the thumbs up on this type of a cross-platform tool. But in terms of this demonstration, we'll focus on administration, right? Managing databases, instances, security, but there's lots of documentation here on the resource site for you. So that's what we're introducing. Just under Help About, you can see the link to the community site. And then here you see the home page, and then here's the Aqua Data Studio page. So you can just download a version and dive right into the areas that we'll take a look at. Okay, so I do have a lot set up here. It looks like kind of an empty layout or a clean screen here, but this is the type of tool that really allows you to dive right in and have a lot set up for yourself. So maybe just to populate some of these screens, and then we'll talk a little more detailed. And then there is a combination of the user interface to introduce here, where there's a combination of windows and then dockable tabs, right? Okay, so let me just slow down here and introduce what we're looking at a little more slowly. To start using Aqua Data Studio, the very first icon, or server, register server, allows you to connect to your different environments and then populate your server's Explorer. So just to show you the scope or range of environments I'm connected to right now, and there's different groupings and customizations of these, but right now I'm connected to an Amazon Cloud environment, some local Excel data sets, right? So more of a analyst type area, but sometimes I like to introduce that in the navigation tree. Here I'm in a MySQL environment, a couple of Oracle environments, some SQL Server platforms, and then previously I've been connected to many other types of environments. So if I click on the very first icon, or server, register server, here you can see that extensive list of platforms supported by Aqua Data Studio. I think Eric had almost every icon available, not quite, right? But this is just an alphabetical list and continuously growing, right? And so here again on the home page for the product, you can see all the databases that are supported, and again, different versions of these. So we say over 30 platforms right now, but probably more than that, and then different versions of those. So when you first install the product, there's a Java install, so you can install in different platforms, Windows, or even a Mac and Linux client, and then you connect to the databases. So click on the Connect to Server, and you'll see an alphabetical list where the text boxes needed to connect to those environments will vary depending on the selection you make on the left-hand side, right? So if I was to choose, say, DB2, I can name that, provide my user login password, location of that server, and then connect to that database. If I was to choose, say, SQL Server, you can see this varies a little bit, right? So I can see what type of SQL Server authentication, user password, what's the host or location of that SQL Server instance. If I was working with Oracle, you have some different choices there. You can use your Oracle client, or you can use the JDBC driver that's provided with Aqua Data Studio, and then you can see some of the Oracle variations in terms of what connection type, host. Oracle uses something called the SID. So what's the Oracle SID? Right? And then there's variations of some of these, right? If I back up to Apache Hive, I can see a drop down here for the connection types, the distribution, right? And then you can see, lots of other choices as well. So perhaps you've inherited a platform that you're less familiar with, but you know how to use Aqua Data Studio or perform your job as a database administrator in a certain platform. This is the type of tool that allows you to inherit that newer platform, that open source environment, that new application with a database backend that you're unfamiliar with. You can dive right in with Aqua Data Studio and move very quickly. And then, of course, you have different bells and whistles here you might expect in terms of naming this or organizing. Here you can see I have a group of my own primary databases and then other databases. So you have concepts like duplicate, right? Clone this connection, and then maybe I want to name this differently or give this a certain color coding, right? So those type of bells and whistles you might expect in a DBA productivity tool, right? So let's keep moving here. Just started with connect, and then maybe for the experienced users like yourselves, there is a connections file, right? And so these connections are just files that you can manage very easily and migrate connections from one machine to another, or perhaps set up another user. Those are areas DBAs might expect in a tool like this. Oh yeah, something else I always like to mention at the start is this is a over 16-year product, right? So a lot of time saving and productivity here in ways you might expect, and for DBAs, these areas will jump out at you, right? So we're already up to version 19 of Aqua Data Studio, and again, just referencing the user community here on www.aquafold.com. Okay, so the server menu is where you find the register server, and then that's also where you find the query analyzer window. So server, register server, or that icon, or the server query analyzer, and you see that icon as well. These are starting points. So if you like to drive from icons on toolbars, that's fine. If you like to drive from right-click menus, that's fine also. So there's register server that we just spoke about. Here's the query analyzer, or your SQL editor, right? And so here you can see some different query analyzer tabs that I have opened. But if I wanted to just open up a new query analyzer, I can just choose a database connection and click on the icon, or server query analyzer, and dive right in. So if I'm comfortable just typing SQL, as many DBAs are, or folks familiar with SQL, that's a way where I'd expect to see IntelliSense and pop-up windows if I was just writing code and trying to move productively that way, right? And then I could execute an individual statement. But for DBAs, you like to move more quickly, right? You like right-click features, scripting features. Let me drill into my navigation tree, right-click on a table, and then I have scripting features from here, right? So let me just expand this to the top portion of my screen. Here's ways of writing SQL very quickly, so I don't have to spend time typing that out, right? Script object to window as a select star, script object as a select with the qualified paths. So these are quick productivity features and right-click menus that DBAs like to see just to build SQL and access code very easily. And then I could execute an individual SQL or all SQL, right? So the familiar execution arrows you'd expect to see for DBAs. So we dove right into connecting and then working on SQL. So here the query menu is enabled where I could talk to some of these features a little bit more quickly for a DBA, right? So here if I was perhaps a DBA and I opened up a query analyzer and then we needed to generate, say, a DDL script, right? So I could just open up a query analyzer and then open up a DDL script very easily. So here if I just dive into, say, a navigation tree and open up a DDL script, here's a way of looking at thousands of lines of code very easily in the query analyzer, right? Where I can scroll ahead and see code with the magnifying glass type feature, right? So let's back up a little bit. I've opened up some different query analyzers, but here, if I just had a new query analyzer, clicked on the yellow file or yellow folder, I could just open up a SQL statement from my file system and then execute that, right? So introducing some of these execution arrows, but maybe just to introduce these through the query menu and some of the areas that we've been looking at. So you have a parse, execute, execute current, execute, explain plan. So these might be areas of interest for a DBA, right? We mentioned the parse. So the parse would allow me to say scroll through and show me the number of statements that make up this editor. Here I could execute all, right? So here's 4 or 5 SQL statements I have in a MySQL environment. I could execute an individual SQL or all the SQL, right? And now when I visit my query history, I can easily see history of SQL I've executed against MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle. These are productivity areas for a DBA that you'd expect in a query analyzer. Okay, so moving a little bit quickly, but I think that's expected for DBA type presentations. And really just touching the surface here, right? We just started by connecting under the server menu, register server, and then the query analyzer. We'll introduce some other areas on the right-click menus, but in terms of the user interface, the tools menu has many DBA starting points, right? Import, export data, generate schema scripts, comparison features. And then the DBA tools provides core administration for most of the major platforms, right? There's probably 15 or so platforms listed here where we provide additional core database administration features. So I'm introducing the user interface here, but as I mentioned earlier, really you can drive from the right-click menu, right? So here I was drilling into some different environments. Let me perhaps minimize some of these to make the user interface less busy. So here's an Oracle environment, here's a SQL Server environment, here's a MySQL environment. I could just right-click on these and notice here, Tools, DBA Tools. So these are shortcuts or productivity areas rather than driving everything from the main menus. And that's functionality driven by DBAs that are used to moving very quickly and working with scripts and managing users. So we can introduce some of these areas from the right-click menu or drive from the main toolbar. But just to introduce some of these terms, you know, tools move data in and out of the database, import, export data. Tools generate my schema scripts or DDL. Right-click there. And then DBA tools, this has some of the core administration features that we were talking about in terms of looking at session information, current transactions, storage information, managing space, instance summary, right? Depending on which platform you're talking about, maybe database manager, instance manager, right? So you have some different areas there. And depending on the platform, you know, if I right-click on Oracle here, I can see some additional DBA tools, right? So again, the goal here is to keep you productive, moving quickly as a DBA. So let's dive into some of those areas, right? So here I was working in some SQL Server databases, right? If I drill into my navigation tree, I can see databases. Then in my databases, I see my object types, right? If I was looking at Oracle, I see schemas. Then I drill into schemas, and then I see my object types. So you can start to understand the different architectures of databases just by exploring the object tree. And then many features in the right-click menu. As I mentioned during the intro slide, as you might expect, a tool that is up to a version 19 has a balance of not overcomplicating the user interface with too many icons, right? So you really want to right-click throughout Aqua Data Studio. And here, for example, there's an object editor for creating, altering, or dropping a database, right? That's more DBA-centric, only found here in the right-click menu. So this would be a floating window or a tabbed window. If I click on Create Database, notice a tab is opened here, and then I could step through these tabs or property boxes to build this database, right? So let me float this window just so you can see this as a standalone, right? So here's an object editor for creating a database in SQL Server. Data files, transaction log, options, right? If I was in, say, MySQL, same type concept, right? Navigation tree, databases, management security. Right-click on my databases, create database. Okay. Now, some of these features you will have in a different user interface through, say, the standalone window, right? So here, if I drill into my SQL Server environment and look at my instance manager, that would be a standalone tab or a pop-up window, right? Where I see summary, parameters, server logs. If I was drilling into the navigation tree, you could get to those areas as well. So here I see snapshots, management, security. Right? So depending on where you're comfortable, you can right-click on certain areas and navigate in the navigation tree or drive from the main menus. Okay. So we just started introducing some of the scripting capabilities. Let's bring some other code here into a query analyzer, and then we'll have some other areas to take a look at in terms of comparison, DDL, and then dive into some of the DBA tools and storage management. But here I was looking at some code, right? If I drill into an individual object there, I was writing queries. Here's the ability to create or DDL scripts, right? So here I could say script to window, create database script, right? So that's very easy just with a right-click menu, right? Or I could do that for another database, script to window as a create script. And then what we'll talk about is some of the highlight compare features, right? Where you can just do compares of DDL scripts, files, tabs, right? Just introducing here how to use the tool, how to navigate. We've started by connecting. Now we've opened some different query analyzer windows. Okay, so right-click is a theme, and you'll find different embedded features. DBAs or experienced users take advantage of some of these scripting capabilities. But if you're looking for a little more user-driven DDL or scripting capabilities, you can drive from the tools or DBA tools or the right-click menus, right? So here, right-click, tools, schema script generator. This would allow you to generate the DDL for multiple objects and then deploy objects, right? Or keep a history of DDL scripts. Or, you know, maybe this is an appealing area for a DBA is integration to, say, version control systems, where maybe I generate source code scripts and then I need to save that to a version control system. So you can see different version control systems that a mature tool like Aqua Data Studio can talk to, where I can check in and out versions of code very easily just through the files pop-out window. Right? So the files navigator is just a pop-out or dockable window. The database explorer, these are just familiar probably to other DBA tools you've used in this space. You can manage these or organize these in ways you'd like as you dive in and become familiar with the product. So let me just keep driving from the right-click menus or the main toolbar menus. I'll keep the Files Explorer minimized right now. Okay, so an area for building scripts exists in different ways in Aqua Data Studio. One would be the tool's server script generator, schema script generator rather. Server script would be logins and permissions. But another DDL area that we'll introduce is the ER modeler, where I could create a diagram of my tables or objects and then quickly generate DDL that way. Right? So let's look at some DDL features. Here I was right-clicking on a database and I could script that to a query analyzer window. There are some scripting options in terms of some of the defaults. Or here I could say, again, right-click, tools, schema script generator, and point to a platform and generate DDL for all the objects in that platform. So here I'm in a SQL Server environment. I see table synonyms, stored procedures, the list here where I can select or unselect. If I was looking at, say, an Oracle environment, you know, that might vary a little bit, right? So here, tools, schema script generator. When you drive from the main toolbar, then Aqua Data Studio will ask, okay, you know, what's the database you're working on? So now I can see some variations for that platform, right? And this is the benefit where Aqua Data Studio is taking care of that for you. Here in Oracle, we have sequences, array types, clusters, slightly different than certain platforms. And this is where Aqua Data Studio can help you dive into those newer platforms very easily, right? If I was generating a schema script for, say, MySQL, you know, how does that look differently? Right? It's tables, views, procedures, triggers, events, right? So you have different database platforms and different architecture of those platforms, as Eric was introducing, and this is the type of product that can really let you dive in and take a closer look at those environments. So here I was scripting just through right-click menus. Further down, we see ER diagram generator, right? So there's a schema script generator where I could say point to a schema, choose my object types, click next, and then this would open up or generate a DDL script in this floating window. Other ways would be generate or save to file, right? One file per object, and then we'll take a look at the ER model as a way to generate a diagram with the scripting behind that. But here you can see some default options there for your scripting. Here's the preview feature, which is very popular, so I could just click next and quickly take a look. Okay, here's 60, 70 lines of DDL just with a couple of clicks. Right? Okay, so that reminds me, I did skip the execution plan tab, so I did want to introduce that. Maybe we'll look a little bit more closely here at the query analyzer and execution plan tab. But right now we just generated a schema script through the tools or the right-click menu. Let's show how we can do that via an ER model and then also get to the script, right? So the ER modeling has a new and generate. So new would be a forward engineering, generate would be a reverse engineering. So in terms of generating DDL in the way we just talked about, ER model generate would be a way to point to an environment and then say turn that into a diagram, right? So it's not enterprise level database modeling, but tables, views, indexes, and storage, right? So tables, views, and related objects. So constraints would be included on this list as well. But here, let me choose, in this example, a handful of tables, looks like 30 or so, and with a couple of clicks, right? Without much of a learning curve. Maybe I inherited a new application, perhaps my company made an acquisition and suddenly I'm working with a new DBA team and I need to take a look at that data model. I mean, how easy was this? Just with a couple of clicks, ER modeler, generate, I'm able to generate a diagram of those tables and those relationships, right? And this is a SQL Server environment that did have foreign key relationships. Right? Maybe I didn't have that, right? Maybe I was in an Oracle environment, right? Let me say I'll right click here and generate an ER diagram in Oracle, right? So here I could right click and say ER diagram generator against my Oracle environment. Again, choose my tables and views here in Oracle and then say generate an ER diagram for these tables. And what I'm trying to show here is an example of tables that don't have referential integrity. So this type of feature can work in different application environments, whether you have related tables or not. Let this finish up here, and then we'll be able to look at both of those together. This is a benefit of the floating window where I can use other windows in Aqua Data Studio while something's running, right? And so again, with the productivity theme, perhaps I'm generating a larger ER model. I could go revisit another window that I was working on, right? Okay, so here's an example of an environment without referential integrity. Here's an environment with referential integrity where you'll see the relationship lines. All are supported within Aqua Data Studio. And then if you needed to, say, drill in or make changes there, or maybe I was creating a new table, right? You could forward engineer, make changes to an existing ER model, double click on a table. You could see the SQL or DDL this way. And then again here, generate script would allow me to generate the DDL and then manage that ways I might expect, right? Or deploy that to another platform, right? So generate script, a couple of clicks, choose where you're going with that, preview, save to file. As you might expect for DBAs, you'd have these type of management features. So maybe just to revisit that files pop out, right? As you're generating DDL scripts, you can just point to your own directories, right? Mount directory, you're a DBA, you organize your folders and environment in different ways. That's fine. Let Aqua Data Studio point to one or multiple environments for you very easily. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just point to the directories that you use currently. Okay, so there's lots of other fun features with the ER diagram that DBAs are always interested in, right? So first of all, compare. So you can do a quick compare with either a live database or an existing model, right? So here I could just say choose another DDL file that I have. Here's some default options, and then show me what's on one side, show me what's on the other. Whoops, it looks like I think I compared to a model that didn't have any differences. Let me say compare with model. Let me do this test comparison. Okay. These are in common but have something different. This object's on one side, this object is the same. Right? Quick, easy to use delta features, right? And that was from an ER diagram. We'll introduce a little more slowly some of the compare features in general, but tools compare with model. Here's another eye-catching or light bulb effect feature for DBAs. I reverse engineered this data model from a SQL Server 2014 environment. What if I wanted to convert those to another platform, right? Convert model. Maybe I'm bringing these tables into MySQL, right? So convert model. Again, this is just tables and views, so it's not a complete data migration, but here I could say, all right, let me choose another platform. Okay, what version of MySQL, for example? Coming from SQL Server 2014. Choose MySQL. Take some defaults. Click, click, click. Pretty easy. With a few clicks, I was able to bring these tables over from SQL Server to MySQL. Double click on that. Let's take a quick look. You know, here's some MySQL DDL. Right? I want to generate a script and deploy this to a test box where I'm trying to do some migrations. Okay, so again, a little bit lightweight here, not enterprise modeling or migrations, but I think as a DBA audience, you're starting to see some of these benefits. All right, let's keep moving here. I'd introduced the scripting features so far, right? So I was right-clicking on databases, scripting. Then we dove into the query analyzer. We were doing some scripting. Then we started introducing some of the tools menu and the schema script generator. So these would be areas I think many DBAs are familiar with. Let's dive into some of the more advanced administration and management features under the DBA tools drill down. So I mentioned that there's over 30 platforms supported within Aqua Data Studio. So all of them will have this type of navigation tree, right? And so if you're comfortable with that, that's fine. Some users prefer an extra user interface window, and so we've built those for these core platforms, right? So here, for example, I could navigate in the Explorer tree where I could drill into, say, current activity in SQL Server under my management drill down. And then here I could see locks, for example. Well, another standalone window would be under the DBA Tools, MS SQL Server Session Manager. Okay, so either way, if you prefer this type of user interface, that might be beneficial. But if you move more quickly through right-click menus, that's fine also. So here as a SQL Server DBA, I could quickly see any application that's executing SQL in my database, right? I could right-click here, look at that SQL, terminate a session, right? So this is for SQL Server. If I was in, say, Oracle, similar, I could drill in from DBA Tools, Oracle, Session Manager, or I could right-click on the connection, DBA Tools, Session Manager. User preference, as you become familiar and start moving more quickly, you have that flexibility. And then you have, either drill downs or tabs here, right? So here's my Sessions tab, here's Session Stats in Oracle, here's Locks, Long Operations, right? So depending on what user preference or which platform you're supporting, there might be variations here, right? So in SQL Server, if I wanted to look at storage information, I can drill in here to Storage Manager, choose my platform, or if I right-click, that'd save this, extra click or two. And now I see first tab, my navigation tree, where I could see some bar graphs showing space. Then I see databases, data files, objects, backup devices, right? So this would be SQL Server, Oracle, perhaps slightly different look and feel depending on the platform. So here, Oracle Storage Manager. And so I can choose my Oracle platform, and then I can see, table spaces are specific to Oracle versus SQL Server. Maybe you're new to that. This is a quick visual or an introduction to that. When we were talking about some of the scripting capabilities, for an Oracle table space and data file, there'll be certain language or terminology that you might be new to. This is the type of tool that can help you dive in, or again, here's the create or alter window object editors, right? So here I could say, create a new table space, and then this would step me through creating a new table space, right? Storage, preview SQL, create. Okay, so I think we're introducing probably choices, which a lot of DBAs like. If you prefer navigation tree and right-click menus, you have that capability. Otherwise, if you like to drive from main menus, you have that capability as well. So session information, storage information. We started talking about documentation, right? So let's go a little bit more there in that area in terms of the ER modeler. You know, a lot of times we're getting phone calls as DBAs asking us to share the data model. So how about the ability just to create a report and post that as a hyperlink so you can stop answering phone calls about what tables are out there and what's the relationship. So a couple of clicks, generate HTML report, post that as a hyperlink, and boom, you can just point people to a URL with the data model. Okay, so some other features that that users might like in the ER modeler are under the tools menu, right? So we talked about compare. Import would be to just bring another table from a live database, right? So maybe you have, say, a gold version of your data model, but you'd like to implement or start exploring an enhancement or a delta between another test environment where you're introducing new objects. Import database would allow you just to point to an individual platform and just bring an individual table from that environment. Okay. And then you have other concepts, right, where you can add sheets and work on multiple tabs and perhaps create business regions or groupings. So some nice bells and whistles here in terms of documenting the database and the ER diagramming. But let's take a look at some of the compare features, right? Some of these I had set up already where we showed source, target, but let's introduce that a little more slowly, right? So tools, compare tools. Here are two wizards that are critical for DBAs. One is just a diff, right, a schema compare. And the next one allows you to migrate changes within the same platform, right? So I could do a compare between Oracle 11 and 12 and then migrate those differences. Or I could do a compare between Oracle 12c on a certain schema and migrate those differences to another. So you have this schema synchronization for the same database vendor platform. Or schema compare allows just any delta, any diff, right? So the similar look and feel for both windows, but so if I choose that DBA tools as a choice, it would open up as a floating window. If you right click DBA tools, or rather right click, you'll see options there. So for the compare features, they're all grouped under the tools menu, and there you see schema compare, schema synchronize, and then what I call the ad hoc compare features, which again are very popular with DBAs. So schema compare or schema synchronize, choose your source, choose your target, right? So you can choose where you're starting from. You can switch these, right? There's that if you chose the wrong direction, you know, that's no problem. That's obviously beneficial. Whoops, I meant to go that direction. So just choose which way you're comparing, left-hand side, choose your object types, and then hit compare, and it would hit the data dictionary and allow that side-by-side compare. So that would be very similar look and feel to what we see here in terms of the result set. And here we can just look at this type of example here, where you can see where it'll show differences. And that's similar to the right-click compare as well, right? So we did just say we were generating earlier. Oops, sorry, my tab here is missing. We were generating some object scripts earlier. Oh, perfect. Good guess here. Okay, so let's look at some of these ad hoc compares, right? Compare tools, tab compare. So notice that's just showing any available or open tabs, right? So here I have some different DDL scripts. I could do a side-by-side compare and see what's different between source and target, right? Here, tools, copy compare, right? So we were looking copy compare. So here, let me just scroll back and copy some code to memory or to clipboard. Oops, I think we were over here. Right, so here's a database create script. I'm just going to right click here, copy to memory, right, copy. Then again, do that for another piece of code, copy. So this is a very popular DBA feature, the copy compare. So here, compare tools, copy compare. It's just asking what's in the clipboard. What did I copy to memory? Let me just choose those two, shift click or control click, say okay. And then there's a side-by-side of any two files you compared or anything you copied to memory. And so in this case, I can see where these databases are named differently. Okay. file compare, right? You can compare any two files, right? Directed compare, right? File compare we looked at maybe with, say, a DBA or DDL script. Right? But here's another example, just side by side. Show me the one line that's different. Show me the structure that's different between these two environments. And a lot of times you're moving quickly, right? Maybe you'll save these. You have these as files saved already. You can just double click on these, open these, right? Open up any previously saved script. Let me just open this up. And now I need to reverse engineer a new environment. And then I want to do a quick comparison and see what's out there, what's different, what's changed. So these are the quick moving features that make Aqua Data Studio very, very popular. Okay, and then maybe just to introduce the scope of this tool being for all types of users, you have some more maybe junior areas that are very appealing, and you might have confidence that other users are using this type of product, right? Where, if I was building stored procedures or debugging code, you have those type of developer features as well. I could right click on a stored procedure and debug and step into code. I'm sure many DBAs were previously developers, and so these type of features you might expect in this type of tool. You have the maybe more junior query builder, right, where maybe folks are newer to writing SQL and you'd like the ability to drag and drop and build SQL very quickly and easily without being an expert at the syntax. So that's obviously a core feature, the query builder. And then the visual analytics is the Power BI or the Tableau type functionality in this product. And that's very appealing to the, say, analyst user that needs to drag and drop and build data visualizations. And so these are areas that are all included in this type of product. And so today we focused on DBA areas, but obviously there's different types of demonstrations that could introduce these areas for other types of users as well. Okay, so again, we usually close out by handing it back over to the speaker or presenter, but just to wrap up some areas that we introduced here today. Aqua Data Studio is a 16 or over 15-year product. So obviously lets you move very quickly as a DBA. You have the type of productivity features you'd expect, but there's a lot of knowledge and different platforms out there. So that's where we always encourage you to visit the user community. So www.aquafold.com will allow you to download a trial version, which is the full version of the product. Again, it's a Java install, so installs very easily. And then we have a reoccurring webcast as well every week. So here's the big register now icon where you could join this type of presentation or share this with your colleagues. So thank you very much for joining. We'd like to thank Techopedia and Eric, and we'll hand it back over to the organizer. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, hey, great job. Fantastic presentation. A lot of really, really good detail. You actually answered a couple questions I had already, but we do have a couple from the guests. So it's always good when you answer the question that was in someone's head without them asking, right? This shows that you thought through where you're going to go with something.
The product helps with that, and that's the great thing about the product. It was created by DBA type users. So, okay, I'm expanding the chat box, but yeah, if you can help Eric, what do we have?
Yeah, sure. We got just a couple questions here in our remaining about 6.5, 7 minutes left. What about security? Can you talk about security features? Is there anything baked in to facilitate keeping these environments secure?
Sure. Okay. So depending on the platform you're talking about, security is a drill down, right? So you see Oracle security, SQL Server security, and then that would vary per platform, right? So you can see logins, remote servers. If you drive from the DBA tools menu, maybe it's a little more visible. So MS SQL Server Security Manager, and then you'd have tabs for that platform. So this would vary per platform. But here in SQL Server, logins and server roles, database users and roles, users roles. So depending on the platform you're talking about, this could vary to different levels, right? So here for MySQL, more icon driven, right? You can add users and create users here. You have a little more security icons in terms of the user interface for some platforms. So here for Oracle, you'd see some variation. So between SQL Server, Oracle, MySQL, here are 3 different examples where the navigation tabs vary slightly, but again, you can double click on those, right click, and then take action, create, alter, drop.
Okay, cool.
Also related to that, maybe is server script generator, right? So schema script generator was users and was objects, tables, views. Server script generator would handle database and users, and that's related to security. Okay.
Okay, good. And here's a power user, it appears, watching this presentation, who writes, Aqua seems to deliver the capabilities that IDERA's Rapid SQL does plus more. Might a Rapid SQL user consider replacing it with Aqua?
I think that's fair. Depending on how, what use cases you use for Rapid SQL, that you could explore that. But there's more platforms supported within Aqua Data Studio, and there's other areas that are unique here, like the visual analytics or the ER modeling. Those are beyond Rapid SQL. So fair point there. I would encourage them to look at Rapid SQL, yes. I mean, I'm sorry, I would encourage them to look at Aqua Data Studio, yes.
You bet.
But just to mention, that's all part of a similar family, right? So Aqua Data Studio has joined IDERA, so you can see that from the parent page. And that's a fair use case for users of some other IDERA products. Please explore Aqua Data Studio. That might expand your productivity.
Okay, good. And I think we got time for maybe one more question here. Here's a very good question from an attendee who asks, can you see which users are accessing which data? What kind of visibility do you have into that?
Okay, I mean, that would be the session browsers. So let me see here if I have one opened, or you can just open a new one. So the session monitoring would provide that, right? So session monitor. So these tabs would be where you can explore, right? So you can see the user. You can see the database. So in terms of the database, we would show, if that's what's being meant by data, you can see the SQL, and so you can see what objects are being called that way. So that this would be the drill down area to look at that session manager.
Okay. A lot of really useful information. You kind of talked about being able to view some of these different environments. I was asking myself as I was watching all this, is this an effective tool for a full-blown database migration, going from one database platform to another? I know that always makes DBAs nervous and the business nervous, but is that a particular use case you could support?
As close as we could come to that was that migration or convert feature in the ER diagram, where I showed a convert here. Otherwise, it's not completely architected as a migration tool. As I mentioned with the synchronization, so under the schema compare, the synchronization is only same platform. So you can migrate changes, from an Oracle database to an Oracle database, or a MySQL database to MySQL. There's not a cross-platform migration.
Gotcha. Okay, good. I know you have one closing slide. If you could throw that up there as we wrap things up from your slide deck with other information. But folks, thanks so much for your time and attention today. Really good deep dive on the technology on Aqua Data Studio. Big thanks to our friends at Techopedia, and of course to our friends from IDERA. We do archive these webinars, so you can hop online to techopedia.com, look for the webinar section to catch all that. And like you heard Devin say, they do webinars weekly. Feel free to check those out. And you can always email yours truly, info@insideanalysis.com. With that, we're going to bid you farewell. Great job, Devin. Thanks to the Techopedia folks. We'll catch up with you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.